Hello and welcome to HotTakes, the Hotwire podcast. I am Sarah Kalhorn, the Vice President of our Industrial Technology practice. At Hotwire, we are a global tech communications consultancy, and HotTakes is an opportunity for us to talk to industry leaders about current trends, how to stay relevant, and how to connect with your customers and the market at large. Today, I am back with Keith Larson of Putnam Media and Steven Freedman of CEDES AG, the industrial sensing company. If you haven't listened to part one of our conversation about how the pandemic is transforming industrial innovation, I'd recommend you start there. In today's conversation, we're going to dig even deeper into industrial innovation and its relationship to larger societal issues. So here we go. All right, the other thing that's happening is there's just nonstop new things. We, are telling all our clients, COVID's the story for a long time. If you don't have anything to say that's COVID related, figure it out. And then we had to tell them starting last month, sorry, George Floyd is the story. That is, it's been just endless change. With Steven, with your facility being located here in the Twin Cities, I saw the note that you sent out to local, potentially global city stakeholders, just about how you're responding, how you're supporting employees in the community, and also to help them understand that your facilities were not actually damaged and there's not a supply chain issue happening here. So many organizations are speaking out about both the initial murder of George Floyd, the protests thereafter, and now this, larger Black Lives Matter movement that's sort of going global. With everyone speaking out, including industrial companies, more so than they ever have you seen anything in this area from companies, and you don't have to name them obviously, that has either impressed you or discouraged you in a way, as all sort of corporations see a new role for themselves, including these industrial companies?
Yeah, I can say that for me, the ones that, and I won't call out any names, that I really struggle with are the ones who won't take a clear position. The ones who try and find that fine balancing point between all parties to try and appease everybody. This is not a type of situation where I think you can reasonably do that and come off genuine. And I think these are the people that I find the most problem with. If you open yourself up to one opinion or another, you do run the risk of offending some group of people on whichever side of the argument you take. Everyone has to make that choice for themselves, but this is not an opinion you can't, or a situation you can't have an opinion about. This is too important, and it goes to the core of who we are as a society. So I struggle with the ones who don't come clearly out and make a statement. Or if they make a statement, they make one that's not clear. On a positive example, there's a woman named Judy Marks, who is the CEO of Otis Elevator, who has consistently impressed me over the last few years in things like women in the workforce, diversity, and with the George Floyd situation and with the pandemic, she has constantly made very clear, very thoughtful public statements that have taken a position on the side of human rights and the value of her workforce in a way that I think has been demonstrating real leadership. So if I was going to call anybody out for doing it right, I think Judy Marks would be the first one I'd think of.
I think if you look at the industrial landscape in general overall, a lot of engineers, a lot of the skilled workforce is retiring, and our focus, I think, as an industry over the last dozen years has been really focused on STEM education, science education, really encouraging diversity of recruitment into the manufacturing as a viable career that was diversity based, so sexual diversity as well as racial diversity. But I think now we're going to see even more explicit focus into racial diversity and encouraging the pathways forward that goes all the way back to grade school, obviously, economic and continued development of the workforce that manufacturing needs. So I think that's going to be emphasized even more going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's a struggle for some companies, especially old school industrial companies. It's already something from a race diversity standpoint. They've already had struggles in the past with gender diversity, and I speak specifically about women in the workforce. But I think they're going to have even bigger issues with the LGBTQ adoption, which I think is wonderful, and I think we should have a much more open adoption of trans people in the workforce, and any lifestyle that someone wants to choose, as long as it's not harmful to others. But I see some of these old established companies struggling actually in those areas. And again, one of the reasons I point out Judy Marks at Otis is she's done a great job of accepting what for an old school company like Otis may have been culturally harder in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I've seen some good grassroots examples within industrial companies as well. I'll just call out one organization that's familiar to both of you. Rockwell Automation. I got a post from a colleague via LinkedIn, but it was to a compendium of books and resources around Black Lives Matter and the Black experience and what it's like. And it was compiled by employees, this whole compendium of resources to share with other employees who wanted to investigate that more. So this was more of a grassroots effort to do it internally, and I think that's also going to be a fertile ground for advancing the cause within industrial companies.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to something Sarah said earlier about it enabling or broadening the Black Lives Movement worldwide. But I can say that the Black Lives Matter movement has been already a worldwide issue. I mean, this is not a new problem. This goes back to early days of slave trade, or even before the colonialization. In this country, it goes forward then into Jim Crow and into redlining and into mandatory minimum sentencing and things that have systemically disadvantaged the Black and brown communities in this country, but also in Europe. But the George Floyd situation for me was not unrelated to the pandemic, in that you had on top of that a lot of built up community stress from people working from home, from people not being out of work and struggling. And it was less the straw that broke the camel's back than the match that lit that straw, and maybe set the world a little bit on fire, which was honestly necessary. We're having a conversation now that's been desperately needed, and hopefully there's actually real systemic change that comes out of this. I have a good friend in Chicago who's a Black man who said and I should point out, not that I'm talking politics, but he's a very liberal Black man, and he said that Trump may be the best thing that ever happened to this country. And it's not because he was supporting his politics. He said because it's showing the world who we've always been.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a pretty powerful statement, in that it's not new for our friends and our relatives in the Black and brown community or in the LGBTQ community. These oppressions and these challenges have been real. It's just now finally becoming something that is forced upon those who don't want to accept it to accept it or be on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Keith, too, like some of the stuff that has been most impactful are the work that companies are doing internally as it leaks out. It's right. The companies that have the most growing and change to do are often doing the right thing and starting by self-examination and self-change and talking to themselves. And some of that is coming out, and it is inspiring, and I'm glad it's coming out as well, and helping other people figure out the right way to do it. But I know, Rockwell for years did amazing trainings, and on their PR team, I was desperate to use these stories, and they're like, they wouldn't let us use them. They really wanted to get people, they were training all the white male managers across the company on diversity training. And I was like, and I was hearing amazing things from these guys about, I've never thought about it this way. I'm really changing how things are going. I'm like, oh my God, I want to do a story about this. They wouldn't let us use it. And I think it's paying off in the sense that what their own folks are doing internally is the right moves. And it takes that long. It's been decades of work they've been doing. And again, still, a fairly white company, a fairly male company, but, has invested over the long term. And that's some of what our advice to a lot of our clients has been like, your first statement should be to your people. Those are the people that you really have the obligation to speak to. And then your customers, and however we get that out, it has to be true. If you're just starting the journey, just admit that. That's okay.
Got work to do. Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. The world seems to change every 2 weeks, even though it was moving too fast before that. So I want to shift back. We originally all got in touch because we were going to have a local dinner in Minneapolis with industrial leaders to talk about how industrial innovation happens. That was in March. So here we are, a whole season later.
We should still do that, by the way.
We should.
Yeah.
We should still do that when it's safe. But I want to talk about the fact that so much of tech innovation today is so data centric. SaaS, information as a service, platform as a service, machine as a service. And industrial companies sit on mountains of data, largely due to some of the history of automation that they've had. And how do they shift from this history of using industrial data for efficiency and productivity and safety and process improvements internally to this wider opportunity of data as a revenue generator that we've seen in sort of the traditional tech space and largely San Francisco, but both coasts more so. So what are your thoughts there and where we're at and what the biggest challenges are next?
I think you see some of it already. I think one of the ways people are dealing with the economic impact of the pandemic is by trying to look at how they can use their partners' infrastructure or finding partners who have infrastructure that they can leverage more efficiently. So I think you're already seeing a shift in some of that. But I think wider, some companies are doing a good job, some are doing a terrible job, but I think they all need to look at how you define data monetization. So data monetization is normally looked at from the traditional view of how do I sell my data or how do I make money off of my data, whether it be from a subscription model or whatever, how do I make money off of that? And that's one certainly valuable piece, and it's certainly an important piece. But you also have, how do I use my data to reduce my costs, whether they be through process efficiency, better sourcing, supply chain improvements, automation, whatever it is how do I use that data to make smart investments, to leverage my money better, to reduce my costs. And then the third way to look at data monetization that a lot of companies miss is as a raw material. So in other words, you talk about machine learning, right? Most companies that are selling a machine learning product, what they're selling is the output of a huge amount of data, right? A lot of big challenges can be solved with a large enough data set and enough computing power. Now, the computing power you can purchase, the data set you have to acquire. In some cases you can purchase, but you have to acquire it. And so the challenge is getting that data set and finding the right way to use that data, which in some businesses may be all three of those things, as a revenue generator, as a cost optimizer, and as a raw material, where in other companies it may be one piece or the other that provides better leverage. But each company needs to, first identify what data sets they actually have and how to value it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think since I started covering this digital transformation era, it's been primarily inwardly focused. So how can I cut costs? How can I be more efficient? How can I increase uptime? Those kind of things to improve the overall operation internally. I think the organizations that are doing the most to leverage data from outside their own organization is really and also changing their business models is when you look at the machine builders, the OEMs who sell large pieces of equipment for use within another organization. So a compressor manufacturer may no longer sell you a compressor, they're going to sell you compressed air, and they're going to maintain that machine on your behalf. They're going to guarantee 99.9% reliability or else pay penalties. So those are where the data that is technically coming across the internet or through some kind of a secured network across a fleet of deployed assets. I think that's where the most business model innovation is happening is with the equipment suppliers that supply industry. That's I think where I'm seeing it happen most, because it changes those relationships and those models as well, and it allows companies to keep track of their equipment in the field and then say, hey, this this piece of equipment's about to go down, send a service rep over to this place. And they show up and the user doesn't even know it's about to break when the guy shows up. So those kind of reactive and uptime protecting measures are things that the end users will pay for, but it's not something that traditionally that they did. So it is interesting.
Well, and it's not that there aren't enormous machine building organizations out there, like, I don't know, Tetra Paks and whatever. There's tons of enormous giants, but there's also a ton of just family owned little shops that are making very niche machines and get the process in and out, but maybe they don't understand the wireless technology and all, and getting that for the remote diagnostics they're going to have to do. Maybe they don't understand the SLAs they now have to build. And not that you can't bring that in and outsource that, but it is just interesting that we're seeing the lead being driven by these people that weren't the most networked. They just had to deliver the machine in the past, and they're the ones having to make this leap. Are you also seeing some of those changes from like the factory as a service people, like the Plexus and the Jabills and the big?
Yeah, I don't know if I could really comment on that, frankly, but definitely seeing, it's interesting how things change. But when you look at remote connectivity of your machine and you're trying to sell that as a new thing, all of a sudden it becomes required. It's like, hey, you better do that. I mean, I expect you to be able to tell me when my machine breaks. So I mean, expectations change very quickly too.
Well, I guess it's like any retail company having to figure out to deliver in 2 days.
Yeah, I don't know if you have.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have any thoughts on that, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sarah hits on a good point when you talk about retail. It brings to mind the company that probably one of the best known and least understood companies in this country is Amazon. And if you look at their business model and how, first of all, what most people don't understand is Amazon's one of the largest investors in automation in this country, let alone in the world. From everything from Amazon Robotics, which came out of Kiva Systems out of the Boston area.
AGVs,
Yep, the little AGVs that drive around, and so starting with that, but also starting with, of course, the miles and miles of conveyor and every bit of pick and place technology that they implement. They are a huge investor in automation. So they're really relevant to this conversation. Amazon's business, everyone knows them as the guy you go online and you order something from and it shows up at your house in 2 days. If you think about the way they're using data, they're actually analyzing every bit of data that you have in order to do predictive modeling to figure out what product should be already waiting at the distribution center near your house before you order it. And that's an amazing amount of data, but they're also selling themselves as a logistics as a service. I don't know if that's actually a term, but I'm going to coin it today, for all these retailers you talk about who don't want to build that infrastructure in. And then they provide Amazon Web Services, by the way, where they make most of their profits. They don't make their profits selling you your pack of socks or your dish soap for your kids' Tide Pod challenge. Hard to say. But they make their money on all the data that they're collecting, and they're making it on all the data that you're collecting because they put in the big web services infrastructure as well. And then they take all that and they turn it into a media empire where, Amazon Prime Video and Amazon directed movies and television. And they became the largest book retailer in the world, supplying both digital and paper books. And all that's based on the preferences they learn from your data, how to get you the right information, the right product at the right time in the right place. And so, they're using data to optimize their warehouses, their logistics flow, their product creation, their subscription services, every piece of their business in a way that no other company is doing, in my opinion. I think they are truly capitalizing on data and on innovation in a way that is not compared to anyone else. One of the reasons is they're one of the largest companies, if they're not the largest in the world right now.
Well, they're hitting on all three of the data monetization pieces you mentioned earlier. Yeah. How to make money off their data, how to reduce costs, and how to use it as raw material. I was daydreaming with my husband and brother-in-law about what the next sidewalk chalk or blow-up pool is going to be that we can invest in, that the pandemic's going to drive just a surge. And we're like, outdoor heaters for the fall when we all want to stay outside longer. So we ordered one, and I went to look online. I was like, Amazon's already got their own private label version. It's done. We're too late. We missed the boat. You just can't beat them.
That is a very Minnesota-centric idea. Can I say that? There's about half the world who would think that was the worst investment ever, but half the world.
I don't know. There's tons of those heaters in California. They love them.
That's because California people are wimps.
They use them in December, not September. So
they're just not as hardy as we are. Let's say it that way.
It's true. It's true. In terms of the obstacles to sort of getting this new way of thinking into the industrial environment, what do you see those as being?
For me, that's actually a really simple answer. And maybe Keith would well weigh in.
I'll see what your answer is first. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so many companies have huge amounts of data in millions of forms distributed throughout the company in paper, in people's heads, in computer files and folders. But it was never, or in different formats or in different structures, it was never created or collected with use in mind. It was created or collected because of business process. So figuring out where all that data is, how to access it and organize it, and let's say standardize it so that it can be analyzed consistently in order to get any value out of it, is the absolute biggest challenge that most organizations have to face, unless you're a newer business that was built from the ground up with data in mind. And that's one of, again, come back to Amazon, great success story. It started its business around data. And so the businesses that are the Rockwells, the Siemens, even us, even here at CEDES, who have mountains of data that is probably valuable if we could only get at it and use it. It's a major undertaking to really try and figure out what all that is, especially when you don't know what you have or what the value of it is, and you may come out with gold or you may come out with crap.
Yeah, I guess I was tackling this question more from a broader perspective around innovation in general. I think the companies that have a culture of innovation and a willingness to change business processes, because I think that's a cultural thing as well, a willingness to challenge, why do we do it this way, and look at those things in a general sense, are also the companies that are starting to tackle that data problem as well, and look at what they've really got in terms of data, because I think it's a larger question of culture of innovation and willingness to do things differently as much as anything else. It's not the technology to bring all this stuff together and analyze it is increasingly there and increasingly affordable, but it's the will to do so and the vision to make it happen.
Who are some old dogs that you've been impressed with in terms of having that will? Some legacy players.
Oh, goodness. Well, I just interviewed the Senior VP of Innovation at Georgia Pacific here recently, a relatively, although toilet paper has been a pretty good business here lately, obviously, but a relatively, old school, Georgia-based pulp and paper company, consumer packaged goods, but doing some amazing things around innovation and really reinventing that company in terms of how they use data. So I can tell you all the details, but they've really done some neat stuff.
Okay, what are some of the coolest startups, either companies or new products you're seeing come out? Not COVID related, just interesting industrial innovations. And if they happen to be COVID related, that's fine too.
Yeah, I'll pick one right off the bat that it is fortunately or unfortunately COVID related, depending on how you do that. It's a Swiss organization called Alunos, a bunch of really smart guys that some of which I've known for a long time. They came out of the semiconductor photonics industry, who had the foresight or the luck, I'll call it both, to back in 2017 start investing in technologies for non-contact vitals monitoring. So, they were a couple of years into product development and had really stable working hardware and technology that could actually be implemented and applied as the pandemic hit. So this company went from trying to get people interested in doing it for a baby monitor or for a sleep lab to being inundated with interest for monitoring in public spaces and workspaces. And so they've done a great job of employing multiple technologies, multiple sensing technologies to handle very complex environments and to get really robust clinical level signals from meters away. And for me, that's a really, really cool company, really cool technology. And like I said, had luck or foresight or both on their behalf.
Yeah, I've got a couple actually. One that's impressed me is analytics company called Seek. It's SEEQ as opposed to a K, but they've really carved out a terrific niche for themselves in doing data analytics around time series data, which for process manufacturing, you're looking at temperatures and pressures and all kinds of things. But really packaging that up and bringing to market a set of tools that a chemical engineer or process engineer can use. You don't have to be a data scientist to actually apply some of the analytics technology to research problems. It really has streamlined the ability to do things that people used to do as of recently a few years with Excel. I mean, that was the only option they had, how cumbersome that would be to work with Microsoft Excel to do analytics. So they've really been doing a great job, and they've got a booming cloud-based system as well, and they're doing great. But again, it's putting data analytics capabilities in the hands of people who understand the process. So you've got the subject matter experts that may not have the expertise in data analytics. Give them the tools that they can solve the problems because they understand what these patterns mean. Whereas a general data science to say, hey, there's a pattern here, but I have no idea what's going on. So that's been an impressive company. The other one that I'll mention is very much on the other end of the spectrum. It's a company based here in Chicago, actually, called Fast Radius. They are pioneering kind of a new type of contract manufacturing services focused around additive manufacturing. So looking at somebody as a company needs to augment their production capabilities. Here's a company that will do it through additive manufacturing. They actually have a 3D printing operation in the West Loop, some of the most expensive real estate here in the country. And they actually make products and ship them out from the West Loop here in Chicago. But the real thing is, one of their big investors is UPS, because they see the need and the opportunity to say, okay, why am I going to ship this piece from China? Why don't I email the file over the PDF or the CAD drawing and build it close to where it's needed instead of always having to ship manufactured parts all around. So there's a very much of a, how do you combine manufacturing with logistics and bring stuff to market more quickly to satisfy local demands. So it's a very interesting company.
Interesting. Yeah, so UPS is backing into the Amazon way from the reverse logistics first, then product versus the. Yeah. Also, is their West Loop office? Is that like a marketing ploy? Can you watch them? You
can arrange a tour to go see what they're doing there, but they do act. I mean, they send real product. They make real product and send it. They have other locations as well.
Yeah. Was that to get employees? Do people want to live and work right there, do you think?
That probably helps a lot. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Well, until March, it was, the restaurant hotspot of the city. And it's starting to open up again, but most of Randolph Street is pretty quiet right now. Yeah. But it's a pretty hopping, young, it's the most fashionable place for young people, I would say.
So pretending that we weren't living in a once in a century pandemic, or we'll see how once in a system it was, what would be the disruption we would be talking about in terms of industrial innovation or industrial investments? What would be the thing that you think we would be talking about this is the big disruptor right now?
I'm going to say what people will refer to as AI. I have an issue with what people call AI, but that's a whole nother story. Machine learning. Yeah. Not truly artificial intelligence. That's for a separate podcast potentially. But
we'll do a science fiction podcast later.
We can.
Alternate universe.
I'll share my geek cred on that one. I said geek cred, not street cred. Let's be careful. The truth is there are enabling technologies in all fields that come out of applying large data sets. And you see it in what Mobileye has done for Tesla, mostly successfully in terms of being able to take huge amounts of recorded standard 2D video images and turn them into the ability to navigate the real world. You see it from pre-diagnosis of x-rays where they're feeding them into machine learning algorithms, and the machines are doing as good, if not in some cases, a better job of at least pre-screening, which limits the amount of time that doctors need to spend looking at those images and maybe actually find some things that were maybe missed. I think that's where you will see it. And that's simply a function of the fact that computation power and memory are getting cheaper and more capable.
Yeah, I think specific to, I think that the process industry and process manufacturing, I think one of the things that we're going to be seeing more of, it's more a matter of degrees than of newness, is this whole concept of the connected deskless worker. I mean, you think of field service and the number of individuals who do work without a desk, and it's an enormous number when you look at the industrial environment and servicing and such. But this emergence of and a way to finally get around the skilled worker shortage is more and more augmented capabilities of deskless workers through technology. So that might be, hey, I've got one compressor expert in my company, but he's going to support these super techs that are more flexible in terms of skill sets, but they're aided by technology or aided by centralized resources that can collaborate over mobile tools, or AI type of applications as well, that you can punch in the symptoms on why your elevator isn't working and comes back with a recommended solution. So I think it's also one of the things that is needed in industrial areas to overcome some of the skilled worker shortages, at least for the near term, until it gets a little more fashionable to get some more people trained up in it. So that was one that I think is more a matter of degrees. I think we're already on that path. And in some ways, I think this COVID thing may have just accelerated it a little bit more in terms of not only is it I think back to what Steven said earlier, some of these nice to haves where you want to be able to solve a problem without getting on an airplane. It's a gotta have now in more and more cases. So.
Yeah, and Keith, you hit on something very interesting, which is the need for skilled workers. You know, the need for skilled workers with the growth in machine intelligence, machine learning, with the growth in the value of data and all this is going to grow. But what's going to shrink is the need for non-skilled workers. And so education becomes critical, but you know, you also look at the fact that as you improve efficiencies in production, in supply chain, in logistics, in every part of your business, one of the reasons you do that is to remove human capital. Humans are expensive and messy. And I'm not just talking about restroom messy. I mean, they're actually, they don't show up for work. They get sick. They spread disease. You know, humans are the biggest problem in any business. Of course, you can, you know, that's, you know, meant to be controversial as I said it.
They resist change. They do all kinds of things. Yeah, exactly.
But the truth of the matter, all these investments in automation and things partially are meant to offset or compensate for differences in cost of workers here versus in China or in other parts of Southeast Asia. So try and level that playing field. But that actually means putting more and more low skilled, if you will, I hate that term, but low paying jobs out of work. You get to, you know, your role. And I think the pandemic, as Keith says, makes that, you know, possibly accelerated. You know, I wish to some extent this had happened earlier when we were doing our primaries. Hashtag Yang Gang. I think Andrew Yang had some very valid points about how we're not losing jobs to immigrant workers. Matter of fact, quite the opposite has been proven, but we are losing jobs potentially to automation. And I think that has the risk to accelerate. And it creates the need for some kind of, I don't want to get into universal basic income, but I think, you know, you get back to full circle in our conversation about the Black Lives Matter movement and about social pressures and high unemployment. a lot of that, if you had a basic level of ability for people to survive and live, and it wasn't necessarily dependent, and let's say also have healthcare, wasn't necessarily dependent on their ability to have a job. I think the job being able to provide, let's say, even better quality of life, but at least a basic level of survivability and freedom available for all people, I think we'd have a different kind of situation when the unfortunate George Floyd incident happened. That all being said, I think automation is a wonderful thing. I think it's necessary, but I think it also has other societal impacts we have to consider at the same time.
At the same time, technology has also created jobs we couldn't even conceive of. So there's the school of thought that, let automation do the things like meat packing, maybe, that it makes sense for. But how do you upskill then? How do you make sure that people are employed? That's definitely an unfortunate consequence, put it that way, but a complicated situation.
When every McDonald's in the Twin Cities and most of them around the country have a voice over IP connection to their drive-through window to India, where someone's taking the order and entering it into the system, and you're outsourcing the 16-year-old's ability to go out and get a job that gets them out of the house and out of trouble. There are consequences as well of that from a societal view. I don't disagree with you that there's value to it, but there's also a question of corporate responsibility, which is in some companies very, very well respected and others severely lacking.
Thank you both so much for joining us today. This was, I could keep going all afternoon. And thank you to everyone who is listening. If you want more information about industrial innovation, read every single one of Keith's magazines. Follow Steven and Keith on LinkedIn. Check out what CEDES is doing at www.cedes.com. And if you have more questions about how industrial companies can and should communicate about their innovation, please visit hotwireglobal.com. We will have new episodes with industry leaders coming soon, so sign up for Hot Takes on our website. Thank you so much.